Good afternoon. Today's demonstration and video is going to cover the latest F5 IPAM controller, which is part of the CIS 2.5 release, which is going to be released in the up and coming days, around about the 15th of July. And the integration here with the F5 IPAM controller using CIS in Kubernetes with Infoblox IPAM. And so, as you can see from the diagram here, what we've done is CIS is able to communicate with the F5 IPAM controller. And in this case, the F5 IPAM controller doesn't have a static range of addresses as we saw in previous versions of the F5 IPAM controller. In this case, what's happening is the IPAM controller is configured to communicate across the web API, or if you want to call it this REST-based API, to Infoblox IPAM. And that's what we're going to demonstrate in this video. So there's a couple things that are quite important. You'll notice that everything is host-based. So you can see in my example here that my host is called mysite.f5demo.com. And what's very specific, in the CRD itself, in the virtual server CRD, I am using the Ipam range. And the Ipam range is really to define the network, or what we call the CIDR, on Infoblox. And so that's really important because we need some way to differentiate what IP address or what IP pool to associate to that virtual server. So as you can see here, we're just using the Ipam range of test. And this is what the controller looks like. The IPAM controller will communicate with Infoblox to allocate an IP address or to release those IP addresses. So how exactly do we go ahead and do this? And this user guide provides you all the configurations. You could literally clone this repo, pull the configurations in, and recreate this environment. There are some prerequisites. Of course, you need a Kubernetes environment. In this case here, I'm using a big AP, anything between 14 and 16, doesn't really matter. This environment here is standalone big AP, but big AP HA will work as well. In this release, this is still kind of preview, so we need to do a little bit more testing when it comes to HA, etc. Some of the prerequisites, we're using the AS3 based API from CIS to big IP. CIS 2.5 is a requirement. Just watch out for the updated image in the up and coming days, since this is pre-recorded before CIS 2.5 release. Same thing with the IPAM controller. We've got some documentation on GitHub, and then of course you're also going to need an Infoblox configuration to set up the Infoblox. I'll show you a little bit about what I've done on the Infoblox server. So from the setup perspective, as I said, CIS IPAM provides two different deployment options when using IPAM. One of the options is by using a statically specified range or a pool of IP addresses that is associated to an IPAM label. So IPAM label test is equal to the following range of IPs. The other option is to use the Infoblox label. Infoblox label is telling the IPAM controller to communicate with Infoblox, specifically looking for Infoblox net view, DNS view, and CIDR information. This is all tied back to that IPAM label we talked about in the diagram. So the requirements here is to tell CIS that I'm using IPAM. So there's only one option in CIS that just says IPAM is equal to true. That's all you need to do in the CIS arguments in the CIS controller, is enable that one task. Now it knows that it's going to be getting the IP addresses for the virtual servers from the IPAM controller. And you can go ahead and deploy that. When you set up the IPAM F5 IPAM with the Infoblox option, you have to specify a few items. The first option is to say, okay, we're orchestrating through Kubernetes. That's the only default option of now. The second option is the Infoblox labels. And so this, unfortunately, is a little complex. We're going to streamline this a little bit in the 2.6 release. But as of now, with this preview, it's based on the IPAM label first, which is my IPAM label of, in this case, test, and my IPAM label of production. So I got two IPAM labels here, test and production. And then you're specifying, in this case, the CIDR range. And the CIDR range is the range of the IPs, and it's a specific class. And then you have to specify the net view, test, and this DNS view. These are requirements that come from Infoblox. And so no matter just copying this, just copy this and just change the values. And the same thing with production, different subnet, net view. And so these are the IPAM label ranges specifically for the Infoblox. The next one, of course, is login. In my case, I'm using debug. Recommend to use something like info when you finish testing. The grid is important because the grid is going to specify the specific URL or IP address that you're connecting to. And we'll see these a little bit later. What port are you listening on? What version of the API? And of course the username and password. So you can kind of see my arguments here. I used equal to just for this diagram, but if you go look at my YAML file, you can do it both ways. It just depends upon how you want to do it. But you can see here as very simple creds where the system lives, and of course the labels. So what's really important is that you go ahead, make these changes, and then deploy. You need to deploy 3 files. You need to deploy the cluster role binding, and so you have to make sure that you've got the updated cluster role binding. You need to deploy the IPAM schema, so make sure you got the updated IPAM schema, and of course the IPAM deployment. You will find all of these files in my repo here. So you can actually look at, if we look at the IPAM deployment, you can kind of see how I've done it here. It's pretty clean. You can just copy this. If you want to get the IPAM cluster role bindings, again, just copy this file or just clone this repo. So once you've deployed your IPAM controller, you can actually monitor it. This is just simply monitoring the IPAM controller. You can kind of see that it's Kubernetes started, that we're starting the worker, the CRD worker. And so now we're ready to create some hosts. So I'm going to do this section live. I've got 2 CRDs. Let's go take a look at those CRDs. We'll scroll up to this top section here. So we'll just go up here and we'll look at the 2 CRDs. So the CRDs, of course, because it's a CRD, requires a schema. So make sure you deploy the schema. And then in this case, I'm going to deploy a CRD for my app and for my site. So you can see here, this is for my app. There's the host name for my app. My app is a production app. So it's specifically going to pull the IP address out of the production environment. So let's go and take a look on Infoblox. I'm going to go ahead and just log in here. So we're going to take a look at the labels here. And as you can see right here, here's our network settings. And this next network setting is blank. So at this point, there's nothing configured. So under production, right now in Infoblox, I can see my IP range, but there is no CRDs created at this point. And if I go to test, select the network, it is exactly the same thing. It's a small range just for testing purposes, but at this start and stop, there's nothing here as well. So at this point, let's go ahead and we're monitoring the APIs. There's been some changes on the APIs. We're monitoring the API here. So this is the AS3 based API. So as soon as we see something on the API, so what we got here, this is the clone repo. So kubectl. So if I go ahead and create this kubectl create, and let's create my app first. So automatically you'll see there's the AS3 based API. So we're posting the declaration. You can already see that there's a tenant and it's a success already. So I don't even need to look at the big IP, but I'll look at the big IP in a minute. And then I can look at the IPAM controller, and what I can see here, just ignore this is still preview. So what I can see right here is there's the key, there's the create, and what it's saying is it's saying host name of my app, and it's assigned an IP address of 33. And so that's what's come back. That's what's come back between the IPAM controller and Infoblox. And if I go back onto Infoblox for you can see the allocated IP address there. So you can see my app.f5, and if you want to look at the logs here, you can actually log this as well. So you can actually see that that IP address was assigned. That's actually pretty cool. So that could be assigned for that a record is assigned. That could be assigned for myapp.f5.com, DHCP, DNS, etc., etc. It's really up to you what you want to do there. That's actually pretty cool. You can actually see there's actually some logs here within Infoblox to actually do some kind of login. You can kind of show here that this is already allocated. If you look in here on the Infoblox, you can see that the reservation, it's in use, and who it's assigned to based on what host name it's assigned to. There are lots of things on Infoblox. I'm not an Infoblox guru, but this integration is pretty simple. Pretty cool. So let's go ahead and create the second CRD for my site, and we'll just simply change the name. There's the API call, there is the update, and so you can see there is the success, there is the update for my site, and so I can go and take a look on the Infoblox system. Down to test, and you can see it's already created there. But if I go to the map, you can see it's really nice created, and there's a couple things that you can do on that. But that's basically what's going on. It's pretty simple. If we log on to Big IP, go to Big IP virtual servers, we can see the two virtual servers are created for 33 and 113. If we go and connect to my site, you can connect, no problem. You can connect to my site, or you can connect to my app. So that really talks about the configuration and integration here. What's the benefit here is that you can create IPAM labels like production based on your development group. So if your development group, or if you want to create an IPAM label based on a name, a tenant, a user group, a persona, an operator, you can do that, and you don't have to worry about allocating or giving users IP addresses. Just give them a range. It's an IPAM label. As long as they match their application name with their IPAM label, the F5 IPAM controller will do everything else. Communicate with Infoblox. Infoblox is highly used. You can use existing environments, and the F5 IPAM controller will take care of that, working with CIS to populate these virtual servers in Big IP. This is actually pretty cool if you ask me. If we go back to the user guide, we can see, go scroll down to the bottom. As you can see, this is what we did. We created my app and my site. You can see we pulled it from there. It was created there, and the logs, and of course for the same for my site. So let's go ahead and recap. This quick demo demonstrates F5 CIS plus F5 IPAM controller running in Kubernetes using CRDs with IPAM labels to integrate into Infoblox based on the CIS 2.5 release. Hopefully you find this useful. If you have any comments, let me know. Any questions, go ahead, like, subscribe. There's lots of more videos coming. I'm working on OpenShift with OVN Kubernetes. There's lots more coming on CIS 2.5. Have any questions, reach out to the F5 team. Thank you.